Welcome back to this ESPON Territorial Research Conference on new research avenues for territorial development and cohesion in Europe. My name is Roland Gaugitsch, a senior policy analyst in the field of territorial analysis and cohesion policy at OIR. On behalf of ESPON, I have the pleasure of moderating the second, third, and fourth session today. Today's event is about exploring new methods, new approaches, and new innovative ideas to support territorial development and cohesion. Such new and innovative ideas are very promising from a research perspective. However, as we explored in the first session, sometimes can be linked to issues of understandability and trust in the results both by policymakers and citizens. How to put ideas in practice while ensuring this trust in the results is what we want to discuss today. In this format, we are bringing together researchers and policymakers to exchange knowledge, share experience, and find solutions that work. But we would also like to engage not only those who are here today, but also you, our remote audience. We want to hear your thoughts, involve you in the conversation, and answer your questions. During the session, you will be able to take part in polls and send your questions and comments on Slido, either by accessing via the QR code on screen right now, or by going to sli.do in your browser and entering the code ESPON. So now we turn our attention to one of the most dynamic frontiers in territorial research and spatial planning, the integration of artificial intelligence and big data-driven methods. In recent years, AI tools have opened up entirely new pathways for territorial analysis. But besides the technological advances, the research we will see today tackles more fundamental questions. Mainly, how can AI-powered insights meaningfully support public policy? AI-driven methods are emerging as instruments for shaping smarter, more responsive, and more timely policies. But at the same time, this transformation brings critical questions that we cannot ignore. How can we ensure transparency and explainability in algorithmic processes used for public decision-making? How do we assess the reliability and the biases of AI outputs when they inform real-world interventions? And how do we strike a balance between data-driven precision on the one hand and local knowledge, political accountability, and democratic values? Today's speakers take us into this complex terrain, sharing concrete examples of how AI in its various forms is applied. Their work shows not only what these tools can do, but also what we need to consider to use them responsively, effectively, and critically in the context of territorial governance. Our first speaker today is Marco Del Fiore, an urban planner and PhD candidate in urban and regional development at Politecnico di Torino and visiting scholar at Sciences Po Paris. He holds 2 master's degrees in territorial planning and environmental planning, and his work focuses on 2 main fields, marginalized areas, in particular in low urbanization contexts, as well as cross-border territories. Besides his research at Politecnico di Torino, he is currently involved in the ESPON CrossGov project and the EGDC project with the Italian National Research Council. His presentation introduces an AI-driven methodology to identify cross-border functional micro-areas using mobile phone data and pattern recognition. As our second speaker, we welcome Orlando Roman, a graduate of the Pontifical Catholic University in Peru and the University of Cambridge. He currently works at ETH Zürich, focusing on adaptive mobility, infrastructure, and land use, and he's specialized in the field of model-based planning support systems for infrastructure. His doctoral research is focused on the development of planning support systems when dealing with future deep uncertainties, such as technological, socioeconomic, and environmental change. And his presentation will show some examples of the application of AI techniques and sequential decision analytics for the planning of urban transformations towards clean energy and sustainable mobility. And finally, as our third speaker, we welcome Mikel Berra Sandin, a graduate researcher who has currently completed his master's at MIT last week. His research spans aspects of housing and urban development, transformation of mobility infrastructure, and territorial economic analysis. Among other assignments, he has worked for the Barcelona metropolitan area as a project coordinator at the Urbex Reconnect European network and for UN Habitat, focusing on housing analysis and international development. Today, he will present his research on multiscalar AI-supported analysis of housing demand and housing demand planning in functional urban areas in Europe. And before we start our presentations, as our first question to the audience, we would like to know from your side, who of you have already used AI-driven or supported methods in their research or other line of work? Please go to Slido and provide your answers. And now we can move to our presentations. At the first topic, Marco, you will present something on one of the key strengths of AI, the work with big data. We also have the pleasure to work together in the ESPON CrossGov project on conceptualizing functional cross-border areas. But you go way beyond this, talking about micro-territorialization. So how does AI support you in delineating and finding those micro-territories?
Yeah. Thank you, Roland, for the introduction and for the question. And thanks to ESPON for inviting me here today. I think that traditionally planning method miss these dynamics because they are trapped in the administrative boundaries. And in my opinion, AI and mobile phone data allow us to have a better understanding of territorial dynamics in the cross-border dimension. So let's start with the role of the mobile phone data explaining in these processes. So mobile phone data has gained increasing relevance in official statistic production over the past decade. The widespread adoption of mobile devices has created unprecedented opportunities for statistical institutes, enabling continuous information acquisition with spatial and temporal granularity previously unattainable. Mobile phone data presents distinctive methodological characteristics, a complete territorial coverage, and high update frequency, and the ability to capture demographic phenomena in motion. So our research, as you can see, identifies 3 application domains where mobile phone data provides significant methodological contribution to territorial policy development. The mobility analysis, where the data enables dynamic origin-destination matrices with hourly and sub-municipal resolution. The tourism sector, when the granular flows analysis qualify visitor by origin, duration, and spatial behavior patterns. And the service and infrastructure catchment areas, where the analysis transcend the conventional administrative boundaries, providing information for optimal size based on actual demand. But beyond big data, the integration of artificial intelligence represents a promising methodological frontier, enabling the identification of complex patterns, automation of evidence-based analytical process, and the development of predictive models. However, there exists geographical dimension where this methodological application has not yet been applied, the cross-border territories. Border areas represent authentic laboratories of European integration across space where citizens daily cross national frontier for work, study, service access, or social relations. But despite this intensity of interaction, cross-border regions suffer from a significant lack of adequate methodological tools for analysis and public policy programming, for the reason that current cross-border cooperation program, also particularly the Interreg program, still focus on the broad administrative units, generally operating at NUTS-3 level. And for this reason, that projects like ESPON CrossGov, in which we are both involved, are seeking to develop new methodological framework to identify cross-border functional territory through a specific indicator and a standardized European approach. In this methodological context, a fundamental concept for my proposal emerges: the cross-border living basin. Of a French origin, this emerging concept is used to define the smaller portion of territory where inhabitants use the most common service and infrastructure. These living areas are defined as geographically, socially, culturally, and economically coherent territories that express homogeneous needs in terms of activities and services. But despite conceptual clarity, the problem of their operational identification remains open. In my view, integrating mobile phone data into analytical frameworks could represent the key to overcoming this limitation, mapping real flow and identifying functional basins that effectively characterize daily life in border areas. Starting from this premise, the proposed methodological solution adapts data-driven approach to cross-border context through a harmonization framework that standardizes data across different operation and national system. The earth of the proposal lies in applying advanced pattern recognition algorithms to identify the cross-border interaction cluster at the micro-territorial level. The methodology is structured in 3 operational phases. First, an analysis of cross-border mobility flows through the utilization of location data from mobile network to reconstruct area at cross-border origin and destination matrices. The second, spatial clustering through AI, with application of community detection algorithms to identify homogeneous clusters. And third, a multi-dimension validation through integration of identified cluster with other functional dimensions, such as the service catchment areas, the labor market areas, and the economic collaboration networks. The optimal level of territorial granularity for this result of this analysis, in my opinion, is represented by the ALAU2 units. And operating at this level, it is possible to identify the functional micro areas with sufficient detail to support target policies while maintaining aggregation that guarantees the privacy protection. However, beyond the more quantitative big data analysis, targeted qualitative surveys in border areas remain crucial and essential. Big data offer a macro view of spatial behavior, but qualitative surveys allow us to the exploration of crucial dimensions such as the movement motivation, the barrier perception, and specific needs of cross-border communities. So, big data analysis of mobile phone data represent, in my opinion, not only the technical progress, but could mark a paradigm shift in the conception of European cross-border policies, from cooperation based on administrative boundaries to micro-cooperation focused on functional areas. This new paradigm offers triple added value. First, a precise identification of priority areas for integrated cross-border services, understanding exactly where and how people cross the borders, allowing us to invest in resources where they are truly needed. The second, a provision of objective metrics on cross-border interaction intensity, precise data quantify flows across border, monitoring pressure based on the number of users and time spent in different zones. And third, objectively evaluating whether a project or policies or intervention has effectively increased the degree of cohesion in cross-border areas. To realize this paradigm, the role of adequate governance structure became crucial, such as, for example, the EGTC, the European Group of Territorial Cooperation, capable of effectively managing these functional territories identified by data. This methodological convergence configures a new model of cross-border governance where evidence-based, evidence-informed decision meet adequate institutional structure to implement policies responsive to territorial needs. In conclusion, the utilization of big data from mobile telephony and the integration of AI techniques represent a methodological key to overcoming the limitation of current cross-border policies, enabling the identification and the management on functional territories that reflect the real need of cross-border communities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's really fascinating and interesting always to see how movements and mobility can really change and shape our understanding of what territories are and how they differ from our traditional administrative views on them. We will stick now with the topic of mobility, namely green transition in the transport sector. One of the cornerstones for this is electric mobility and transformation of urban infrastructures. The widespread application of electric mobility also implies a considerable shift in planning approaches to transport infrastructure. And we are now going to hear about an approach that improves not only what do we plan, but also how do we plan for this transition. Orlando, please. Sorry, I have to.
Thank you, Roland. Yes, so I think AI is known for the ability to improve our prediction capabilities, and also we can design optimal systems under such predicted conditions. But when we think about planning, or most importantly, long-term planning, this idea of predictability and optimality might not be adequate anymore. So we can certainly predict a most likely scenario, but we need really to open up the cone of possibilities towards a probable area, so what's likely to happen, a possible area, what might happen. We can even imagine preposterous scenarios, so what we currently deem as impossible. And when we are thinking about these uncertain future scenarios, we can also delineate a desirability region, so where we would like to end up, let's say sustainable future. And we think that under such massive uncertainty, AI can help us a lot on exploring potential future conditions, exploring potential trajectories, and help us land into our desired scenarios. For example, we can study not only single trajectories, but we can try to identify what changes, what interventions we need to do over time and when, so we can shift these trajectories towards our desired sustainable future. And this idea of scenario exploration and scenario planning is not new, but AI is not typically linked to scenario planning. And we think that when systems are very complex, intuition might not be good enough, and we can use simulation models, we can use AI techniques to help us better understand such complexity. As Marco mentioned, we can use big data sources enhanced with AI to understand such complex systems. So I want to show you how we are doing this at the Future Cities Lab in Singapore. This is an example of planning charging infrastructure done by my colleague, Dr. Chi-Min Ji, at the Future Cities Lab. And as we can see here, there's three interrelated challenges. The first one is about the decision to supply charging infrastructure to help this transition towards clean energy and a sustainable mobility system. So first, the question about when to deploy these chargers, where, what type, what quantity. It's a first important challenge. The second one, we need to deploy this infrastructure based on certain mobility demand, which is also evolving in space and over time, and it's uncertain. So, for example, what will be the fleet size of the future and whether this fleet size will be electric or not, those are uncertain questions. The third challenge is about the grid capacity. So we need, in our efforts for electrification, we need to consider the grid expansion plans, voltage, capacity as a constraint. So we can clearly see here it's a complex problem, interrelated layers. So our approach is trying to build simulation models that can reflect the conditions of Singapore in this case, well validated, well calibrated, and those and using big data sources, of course. And in that way, we can better make sense of what's happening in the system. So we then create this simulation environment where we can test different trajectories and different plans over time and evaluate them. So in this approach, we create an agent, which could be the planner, let's say, and we use reinforcement learning, which is an AI technique. So the agent interacts with this environment, tries different policies, different plans, evaluate if these plans are achieving the objectives to promote a clean energy mobility system, and it learns over time, iteratively. So in this simulation environment and across many iterations, we can delineate what's the best pathway under uncertainty. In this exercise, we not only achieved more efficient use of resources, so less chargers, less investments, but at the same time, we achieved a better service in general. And most importantly, I think using AI in this way provided us with the ability to have a plan that is adaptable. So under different potential future conditions, the algorithm recommends different sequences of actions. So in this way, planners can adapt. So they don't need to make a rigid decision now, but they can adapt over time according to how the future unfolds. Another example I wanted to show that we did also at the Future Cities Laboratory was about how can we respond through urban planning to the deployment of automated vehicles. So how can we modify our cities to make the best out of this new technology? So we tested different network configurations, grid networks, superblocks, different parking strategies, different designs for pickup drop-off points for shared automated vehicles so they can better fit the public transport. And I just wanted to show these two figures here because I think they exemplify how AI can be used in a participatory planning way instead of just dictating a single solution. In the upper figure, this is a typical parallel coordinates plot. So there's these 4 coordinates in each of the y-axis. So those are the 4 objectives of the planning exercise. So we wanted to minimize investments, we wanted to minimize carbon emissions, maximize public transport volume, minimize travel delay. And we can see that different plans with different colors, they achieve these objectives to different extents. For example, the green strategy is the one that minimizes carbon emissions the most, but it doesn't perform very well on the other objectives. The same can be said for the max transit plan or the mean delay plan. And what is nice about this graph is that we can clearly evaluate the trade-offs. For example, if we compare the green strategy and the max transit strategy, we can see how much carbon emissions are we compromising instead of getting a certain amount of public transport use. This graph is also important for discussion and for consensus buildings because we can identify some compromise solutions, let's say. So the ones that are pretty solid across most of the objectives, even though they are not the best in any particular objective. So the idea, or our idea, is that we can use these AI techniques, sequential decision analytics, to help not only planners, but in general stakeholders make these trade-offs, compare different strategies, and hopefully agree on a compromise solution. The bottom figure is a way of depicting these plans as pathways. So the idea of a pathway is that we can follow an indicator, in this case in the x-axis, the amount of automated vehicles usage, and according to different thresholds, we can, or the plan give us or tell us how to modify the city according to different thresholds. So if we cross 40 million of automated vehicle usage for the mean delay strategy, we need to change it to a grid network, distributed parking, and few pickup drop-off points. One important point of this exercise is that we were able to do this scenario generation in tens of seconds. So we can actually perform these calculations in real time in a workshop with stakeholders, and we can estimate different scenarios, different objectives upon request. And we think that's a good way to help participation and engagement in planning.
Thank you very much. Very interesting to see how we can basically improve the existing planning approaches with those new methods without completely reinventing the wheel, but using well-established techniques in an improved manner, for example. We are moving now to another field within urban development that also sometimes shows quite quite a tricky disengagement between existing planning practices and new realities that emerge, and that is housing. Mikel, you show in your research that there is quite a disconnect sometimes between the level at which housing demand materializes and the level at which planning decisions ultimately are made. So how did you use AI tools to bridge that gap that exists?
For sure, yeah. Thank you, Roland, for having us. And indeed, AI can help bridge these major gaps in housing research, making it feasible to analyze large amounts of local data, but in broader geographies. I guess I'm not discovering any secret to anyone here, but housing is a problem across Europe. We are having rising prices both in sale and rent units. And the way I like to see this issue is that we are united in diversity, as the EU motto goes. We are united because every country or every metropolitan area has an issue with housing affordability, but this issue is diverse in the sense that the supply dynamics, the planning frameworks, the policies, and therefore maybe the solutions should be different and specific to each of those realities. That's why we need data-based evidence to see what's happening in each of these places. And the way I've tried to jump into that is by formulating two research questions. First one is to see how has planning supply happened between 2011 and 2021 in large EU functional urban areas. And second one is how has housing supply been planned for those same period. And by doing so, I'm tackling the layered nature of the problem. This is an EU-wide issue. It has metropolitan effects, but the power to decide on housing relies mainly in the local level. So let's say there is a mismatch in these different geographies. And to fill this gap, I followed a bottom-up approach, which is creating and gathering data at the local level, aggregating it and analyzing it at the metropolitan level, and doing so for all of the European Union. However, retrieving this data at the local level might be complex and challenging, and that's where new data sets and the use of AI might or do help us in conducting this research. So, jumping into the images, what this research has done is creating basically two data sets. First one on the left, providing data on population, households, and housing units for each of the municipalities at the European Union in 2011 and 2021. And the second one is leveraging AI to analyze more than 140 urban plans in large urban areas of the EU. Let me get into a bit of detail in these two. So the first one is basically quantitative data. It uses 2011 and 2021 censuses, which were coordinated across the European Union, to provide information for almost all of the municipalities at the EU, every municipality except for Romanian and Italian ones. And it allows to, for example, analyze if housing units have grown at the same speed as population for each municipality. On the other hand, on the right, I've gathered local, metropolitan, and regional plans for all urban areas above 2 million inhabitants in the European Union. And as you might think, this is a bit of a more complex analysis. Again, above 140 plans in 12 different languages, different structures, different powers, different governance levels. So this is where AI comes in handy. By using large language models, which streamline the analysis, we can retrieve specific information in a quick, traceable, and comparable way across these plans. For example, we can ask for how many housing units do they plan to build in every given year, or which implementation process for this housing do they propose. So with these two data sets, I've been able to analyze two things. On one hand, the relationship between housing supply and demographics, and on the other, the relationship between housing supply and planning. And before jumping to the EU-wide results, let me exemplify this with one functional urban area, which will be, in our case, Paris. So here in Paris, again, at the functional urban area level, you can see on the left this relationship between housing supply and demographics. In the map, you can see at municipal detail whether housing supply has outpaced population growth or not. In blue, the municipalities in blue show that housing supply has grown faster than population. Municipalities in red tones show the opposite, that population has grown faster than housing units, maybe then hinting to a pressure over the housing market. And in the right, we have the plans that have happened for housing in the Paris area. The Paris governance happens in 3 levels, so at the city level, to make it simple, at the city level, then at the metropolitan level with the Métropole du Grand Paris, and then at the regional level with the Île-de-France region. And 2 out of these set really clear housing goals for these regions. And this is where AI comes in really handy. We can ask specific questions to AI, which you might think for these 2, maybe not worth it, but when we scale this up to more urban areas, using AI as a tool for analysis speeds up this process and makes it comparable and easily traceable. So in this case, let's focus on the regional. The plans set up a goal for 70,000 housing units per year, while this is the reality is pretty much beyond, lower than that. It's not reaching that goal. So still, Paris is a pretty good example. There's enough housing for the population, both at the city level and at the functional urban area, and the planning happens in a multi-scale way, representing the reality of housing issues which happen at this metropolitan level. So let's jump back at the EU scale, because this nice example is not always the case. The advantage of creating this kind of EU-wide data sets is that AI methods is replicability. This analysis I've just shown for Paris can happen in as many EU functional urban areas as needed in a pretty straightforward way. So again, jumping into these 2 elements of analysis, let's start with housing and demographics. Here you can see how housing units and population relate in these large urban areas above 2 million inhabitants. In 8 out of the 23 analyzed here, housing units have not sped up as much as population in the analyzed 10-year period, therefore showing some pressure over the housing market. And these are concentrated in also geographically in the Iberian Peninsula, as you can see, and also in the coastal cities around in the north of Europe. You might think also that population is not an indicator, like the only indicator we should use for housing research. For sure, the full research does focus also on household size, on migration patterns, to better analyze these drivers for demand. And it also allows to analyze differences within each metropolitan area, trying to compare how dynamics happen in the central city versus in the surrounding municipalities. And reality is that it's these surrounding municipalities which have the higher growth, both in housing and population, but also the higher pressure, because in these areas, population is growing faster than housing. So jumping into the housing and housing supply and planning analysis. So here, this allows us to analyze the scale at where housing supply is being planned and whether planned growth and real growth do match or not. So as you might see here in the urban areas in pink, the scale where housing supply is planned is mainly local. Most of the urban areas in Europe focus or set these goals of supplying housing at the local level. And at the same time, we can see that real growth does not match planned growth. Maybe this, let's say, growth goals are pretty ambitious, and that might be a driver, but we can see that there is a mismatch between these 2 overall. So in sum, we can see 3 research outcomes out of this full research. First one, for specific functional urban areas, there is not enough housing being built to cater for the population demand. Second one, housing is a metropolitan issue. Like the demand and the growth is happening mainly in metropolitan municipalities and not that much in central cities. And third one, housing is being planned at the local level, therefore showing a mismatch between the reality of the issue versus where policy responses or solutions are happening at the moment. But beyond the issue of housing, this process wants to also provide a methodology for research across Europe. The use of AI allows for analysis of large unstructured data, in this case, housing plans, for new insights, which can be easily comparable and therefore can jump over borders and create this kind of joint joint knowledge to act into the European level. And again, it's an easy way for research, not only for housing. This could be applied in other fields as mobility, as our colleagues are working, or environmental issues, or any other. So in sum, the goal is to better analyze our diverse system of policies and laws that is in place in Europe to provide uniting, data-driven responses to the emerging challenges.
Thank you very much for this very interesting presentation. Especially, I like the last slide showing this this disconnect in some of the cities very, very strongly. That is good to see this in front of you, basically, at some point. Yeah, thank you very much to all of you for those presentations. We have seen some very interesting and innovative applications of AI in your various fields of research, and we see the common ground between them more or less to improve the planning systems that we have, to make the planning systems more intelligent, more adaptive, more timely, and more just, or more reflecting reality in many cases. These are very high ambitions, and we would like to explore a little bit more in detail if we will be able to achieve them. From our poll at Slido, we have seen very interestingly that about 50% of you already occasionally use AI methods, 25% use them regularly, and 25% never use them in their daily work, which is for me quite interesting. I would have expected more people who regularly use it at the moment. But this underlines quite well that for some people AI is really more considered just another tool. We have developed thousands of tools over time in research, and AI is just a new one. We do not necessarily need to apply it. To others, AI is really considered as kind of a paradigm shift, something that makes completely unthinkable things true now. And we have heard in the presentations some hints already at we always had techniques, methods, scenario techniques, for example, but now we are really at a changing point where new things become possible that we could not achieve with those methods before. So I would like to know from you, for your perspective, is AI just another tool, or is it really something paradigm shifting, and could you have achieved maybe similar results, similar high quality results without the use of AI in your work?
I think it depends on how we use AI. For some applications, it could be just a tool, but there's definitely the potential to be a paradigm shift. And it can enable to do things that were not possible before. For example, in the examples I just showed, specifically in the last one, we estimated that without the use of AI, we use a specific techniques called surrogate modeling, so to approximate very big complex models that are difficult to use. And we estimated that without using AI, our whole computation could have taken several months, and we did it in a few days. So this could be seen as a gain in efficiency, but I will argue that such a massive difference it's basically, or could result in planners trying it and doing it, or just not doing it. So I would say that AI could be a paradigm shift and will allow us to do much more things and better planning than before.
Okay. Yeah, I think we also see this in your case with big data analysis that could not probably be achieved in the same way.
I totally agree with Orlando. And my studies, in my opinion, see the AI more as a methodological bridge that connects big data to concrete territorial decision. And according to you, without AI, we are not able to do like such a multi-layer, multi-scale analysis from different sources. In some way, AI allows us to have a better understanding of territorial dynamics that was simply impossible before. In that time, we received that information and that analysis.
So we're improving kind of not only accuracy but also possibilities in this case. But I was wondering, when listening to your presentation, you mentioned, for example, languages are a barrier, or the diversity of documents. Instead of AI, could you have just employed a lot of researchers to do the same thing?
In my case, like here we are seeing very sophisticated ways of using AI. Mine might be AI for dummies, pretty simple, and trying to retrieve specific information, which again, as you were saying, could be done with like larger teams or with larger time. But what AI does is, let's say, lower these barriers and increase efficiency, also as Orlando was mentioning. So in the case of the analysis of plans, this could have been feasible, but much more time-consuming. These barriers in language would be relevant. And like without this, with AI, we can pursue larger scale research in reasonable time and budget and go into the scale we really need. Like if we need to do European policy for a given issue and we need to do it now, we have to jump in as quickly as possible. And I think AI might be a helpful tool for that.
Is there a risk of being too quick in that regard?
I would say let's be quick in the analysis and let's not be quick in the decisions. Like the advantage of AI is that we can, let's say, spend less time in doing the analysis and more time in asking the right questions and then doing the right interpretation of the analysis to make the policies we really need. So let's be smart about it. Let's use our minds wherever they are more helpful, and let's let the machines do whatever it's more time consuming and not that relevant for us to do.
Yeah.
I think it's also about being systematic and replicable, right? Because if we hire an army of experts to evaluate different plans, it will be difficult to really explain afterwards how they did it and if a different army could replicate those results. I mean, in AI, that's possible. The results might be also biased or maybe not as good as you would like, but you could at least trace how the analysis was done.
Mm-hmm. But this reflects mainly kind of the methodological side, basically. So you already said, let's be quick in the analysis, but not quick in the decision. So do these methods mainly influence kind of the analysis side, or what kind of influence do they exert on the decision-making process, and what kind of influence do they have on the specific roles of planners and not researchers in that regard in particular?
Well, in my opinion, it's not just improving existing practices, but it's radically changed the way we understand territories. Thanks to AI, we can define policies that are real based on functional interrelation in these territories. And thanks to that, we can define project policies or intervention that could be more, could have more impact on people's daily life and daily needs. And for the future, for the next 10 years, I think that the role as a planner is increasingly evolving as role as facilitators who use big data and AI to guide more adaptive decision-making processes.
Yeah, in that regard, though, it's interesting to understand how will planners adapt to the new reality, to the new paradigms that AI is creating, right? I like to see this like a chewing gum where AI pulls research and new insights forward, and maybe the institutional realities are falling a bit behind. And the risk is that the chewing gum breaks because this gets way too advanced. So we have to make sure that this exchange or transfer of knowledge does happen and that AI is understandable for both sides of the table. I think the results of the slide are pretty interesting in that sense, seeing that quite a bit of people do engage with AI already, 75% of the participants, so that's a good amount. So I guess this low barrier of entry into AI might be helpful in keeping people into the realm and keeping this advancement, which happens both in research and in actual application and in the planner's work.
In daily practice as well.
Sure.
Yeah, and I also think that the use of AI creates the need to rethink planning practice a lot. For example, AI gives us this opportunity to be more adaptable, and this idea of that we can monitor, we can sense the environment, we can learn over time, so we can modify our decisions, our plans to uncertainty that is high nowadays. But that needs a break, or that needs a reformulation of regulatory frameworks, planning processes, organizations, because nowadays what it's typical is this one-off based planning. You do a fixed plan for the next 5, 10, 15 years. When it's approved, it's very difficult to modify. So to what extent we can use these AI improvements and adaptability, it's a big challenge from an institutional process perspective, I think.
I think that One of the most important or the more revolutionary aspect of AI is its capacity, its ability to predict future scenarios, and not just one, but to model alternative scenarios. And in this case, we as technicians, as planners, we can some way anticipate or evaluate our decision, our project before implementing them, and then to choose the best situation, as your case studies show.
Yeah. So they kind of increase the tools, the knowledge that we get on hand to make the actual decisions. But I really see this point of existing planning practices are not linked to university and research always, but they're linked to administrative procedures, and they are more rigid in many cases. Sometimes there is, or very often there is a good reason for it, that they are more rigid, but we really need to find the link between how quickly research is developing and how quickly we can and we need to adapt the administrative procedures linked to it.
I think in that sense, maybe there might be an issue with how easy or how quick it is to get political consensus in decisions. I mean, AI might provide really quick insights of what can be done, what cannot, but political rhythms might be in another speed on one sense. And also, seeing how institutions adapt, both in terms of levels of governance. I think Marco's research was really pointing into we should be planning for these smaller territories, but how easily will administrative frameworks adapt to that is a bit of a challenge. So I think AI might be helpful in showing this evidence and showing these alternatives more clearly and making the decision-making process easier or faster, but still we will have other hurdles to face for sure.
That's for sure. But you mentioned that it might get easier. It might be accessible in many cases, or it might have a lower barrier to entry, basically. But still, I can imagine outside of the administrative procedures that are prescribed by law, we also have. I wouldn't say resistance, but slower developments maybe in public administration and in institutions that are responsible for the implementation. So what do you think could be relevant for institutions that have to implement, that have to maybe apply such methods? What kind of capacities do they need, and what do we need to develop to support them in these applications?
For me, it's important also another aspect, that are the strong disparities in the administrative capacity between large urban centers and small municipalities. In my case studies, is very clear, these things. And in this context, I think that simple and intuitive AI tools can try to reduce this digital divide and improve efficiency, capacity, even in the less equipped administration that they really need in this moment, this boost of capacity.
Mm-hmm. I can also feel that this wave of AI, it's being used, and I see lots of even smaller municipalities or administrations being excited by the prospects and trying to implement different things, even from image recognition in the city cameras to count the number of vehicles and bikes and pedestrians. So those small attempts, I think, will help integrate all these techniques better into planning practice. There's this idea of digital twins as well. I see multiple cities also collecting a lot of environmental data. And of course, for them, it's difficult to use the data, but they are at least collecting it, they are planning what to do with it, they're creating these new teams for digitalization. So there's the intention, and there's this wave of trying different things that I think could help.
So there is the actual interest also by themselves to apply the methods. It's not just something that is brought in by research, for example.
Yeah, I mean, definitely this external point of view from researchers, from consultants to help planning, that is happening, that will continue to happen. And then I think the more fundamental question is if the administrations themselves will be able to implement this. And then we go again to this question of implementing AI into the planning processes and the administration. by itself, which is a bigger challenge. But I see some successful examples there.
I will also add that AI also might help these administrations to, let's say, manage or achieve other skills that are not AI-based, say like other coding, other different platforms. So I think it's, let's say, a hopeful time where administrations can easily access more sophisticated methods for analysis. But then, yeah, we have to keep in mind to not get lost in the analysis and like be able to transfer that to decision making. So make sure that we use artificial intelligence, but then we use human knowledge to apply things and to get to actual change being implemented in our cities.
Yeah. And do you see this as kind of more of a bottom-up movement? You mentioned that there is the interest, there is a lot of applications that are possible. But at the same time, we're talking about public administration. They have to follow procedures, legal systems, and so on. Do you see this as something that can grow bottom up, or without the administrative changes first, the legal changes first, we will not be able to move?
I would say, I mean, there's challenges in data management in there, I would say, and in privacy and also like being sure about showing how decisions are made and having traceable systems. And at the same time, I think we are only focusing on who uses AI as the decision makers, but let's think broadly. Like AI might be used also by communities or by other stakeholders to find either research, evidence, or to create new visions. Say they want to think about a new park and they'll just create a rendering from people that wouldn't have the skills otherwise. So I think AI can create a broader, let's say, way of collaborating between or working between administration and other stakeholders. And I think it's nice to think about it that way, where we have to, in any case, keep track of where that information comes from, being really clear about the communication. So, yep.
I mean, that leads over to the second main question that I would like to ask. But before, I would like to encourage you again to put your questions on Slido, and we will see them here on the screen and be able to answer them. But in the meantime, let's start or continue the discussion on these aspects of kind of the methods we are seeing and applying. They do not only change kind of the territorial analysis part, but also the decision-making part. And for this, we have the key aspect of trust that was discussed in the first session this morning as well. So having this traceability, not only thinking about what can be done, but also how can it be done, and how can we communicate clearly to people who are affected by the decisions made based on this. How did this happen? You are probably very well aware that every time someone mentions AI, we think a little bit of a black box, like I put in some data on top, then I have the machine working, and then I have a result at the end. And you probably also had to explain several times the answer to criticism regarding that. So how do you address these kind of always implicit questions of existing bias? How do you ensure that the process remains transparent and that the results are representative for the actual reality in these cases?
Well, I consider the origin of the data of fundamental importance to ensure the transparency of this kind of processes. And I also consider data as public goods. That means that we as technicians, planners, we are not dependent only on private companies, and we can use different kind of sources also to reduce the bias of the data. But clearly, it remains essential to clearly explain how these algorithms work to the stakeholder, to the community, and other decision makers involved in these processes.
I think this is one of the main challenges of AI, and not only for planning, but especially for planning, how to create trust. And there's a growing field on explainable AI that it's trying to tackle all those issues. But specifically about how we are using AI for planning the future, let's say, we don't necessarily use AI as a complete black box. As I showed, we use mainly AI on top of an existing system model. It could be a model of the transport system, of the land use system. Most cities, they already have their own model developed over many years, calibrated, validated. They trust those models. So that's a first way, I think, of not using AI as a pure black box, but building on top of something that is trusted already. And the second way is what I tried to show in my last slide. So trying to create these AI policies, these AI-generated plans, in a way that it's interpretable by itself. So they are clear, they are applicable, they are usable. So planners don't require to go to a computer and get the next intervention, but they can understand the patterns, they can understand what can be done. And we feel that this interpretability in the design of the result can also help build trust on the AI-enhanced planning techniques.
So when you applied, you mentioned those participatory workshops showing kind of live predictive capabilities and so on, where you met with kind of resistance or criticism towards or mistrust in let's say the results displayed on screen?
I think there's a lot of interest first, but of course then there's a lot of questions. But I think those questions come normally from people that it's their first time looking at such results, and that's understandable, and that's something we need to develop and work on. But at the same time, I think it's good that there's people that for the first time are being able to access to such discussions and results. So AI enable us to do such processes, but of course there's a lot of work to be done on the real human-machine collaboration, as Mikel also mentioned. Yeah,
also in that sense, it's also about making sure that, humans can interpret what happens in the AI black box, to say so. I think you mentioned it pretty nicely, but it's asking AI not only to give a given outcome, but also to show where the source of this information is coming from, if we provide it, to make sure that it's reliable sources, if AI is finding its own sources, to make sure that we can trace those, and then moving to more complex analysis, as Orlando was mentioning, this concept of explainable artificial intelligence. So knowing about which is the decision-making process of the model towards a given outcome, and maybe also showing which are the thresholds that this model is using to choose outcome A versus outcome B, because maybe it's these thresholds, the ones that are relevant in a policy, from a policy standpoint, saying, if we go above or beyond this, we should go this way or that way. So trying to show how this decision-making process is made within the AI box, I think it's relevant in terms of both research, but also then policymaking.
You mentioned also validation of the approaches, of course, and validation of the outcomes as a relevant aspect. I guess this is relevant to all research, not only to AI, but I guess here it's one of the more relevant aspects because of this kind of inherent distrust that is sometimes created. In practice, does this mean, thinking about, for example, future scenarios and predictive capabilities, does this mean setting up parallel processes to kind of validate is the output of the model realistic or not? Or does it depend on your judgment, your experience as researchers? How do you implement that in practice?
No, for sure, there needs to be this expert consultation, expert elicitation. Human knowledge, it's always part of the refinement of the algorithms and the processes. So even if we use a digital twin of the city, let's say that it's well calibrated, it's reflecting what's happening right now. When we imagine future scenarios, that calibration is not possible anymore. So it needs to be used with some expert thinking and delineating if this is reasonable or not, if this makes sense. So in that way, AI is not only used as a way of predicting what will happen, but more like a tool to imagine certain scenarios, to imagine possibilities. So in that way, it's fully connected to what people need from it and what's reasonable and desirable.
Yes, maybe with this kind of tools, it's easier for the stakeholders that are not normally involved in these planner processes to imagine future scenarios and understand what kind of these scenarios fit better with their future and the imagine of the territories and the cities they want for the children for the future. It could be maybe more useful for them than not for us, that we are able to understand the plan and policies and practices instead of people that are not normally involved.
Yeah, that's a pretty nice way to frame it. It's this kind of easing people into the process of planning, of thinking how the future of our environments, our territories might be. And I would say at the same time, it's interesting to see how, when we are thinking about these new paradigms or these new, let's say, alternatives, AI might also only provide that, based on the data that they have or that the model has. So let's not limit ourselves to that and be sure that data in there provides given outcomes, but there might be additional outcomes that could come from other more qualitative, let's say, insights. So AI is a relevant tool, but especially for this kind of scenario making, but we should still be able to build upon that. So it's pretty interesting to give us different pathways, but to think creatively upon those two is a relevant step to be done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, creativity for sure is relevant. Not that we hand off everything to the model, but we still keep the research, keep the creativity ourselves. You described kind of a lot of, let's say, real-life practical applications today. So they do not happen somewhere at the academic level, and they're not transposed into reality. But we talk a lot about technical outputs today, of course, and sometimes there might be a risk of over-relying on those technical outputs, especially when communicating with decision makers and in decision-making processes. So how can we ensure that kind of whatever comes out is also democratically accepted and is understandable to the decision makers?
Yeah, I think the risk is real to be too much technical in this process, and for that, this reason that human involvement remains essential to validate our quantitative analysis, but generally speaking, not just with AI or big data. As planners, we plan for people and for territories, and we must validate our data with their desire, this idea. So I think it remains essential, or maybe it's more important also in the AI, with the AI tools, to validate this data with other qualitative analysis or surveys, and to open discussion and to have some discourses with the stakeholder, the decision maker, the community, all the community involved in this kind of process.
Yeah, I think, as I mentioned before, I think Marco was leaning towards that. Community might also involve or use AI as a tool, and I think that might be enriching for them into understanding more complex issues where probably non-technical audiences will not have access to at the beginning, and also creating new visions. But again, in both cases, both for decision makers and for the community, it's relevant that the evidence is transparently funded and it's clearly explained, especially clearly explained. So, and at the same time, there might be a risk where we are developing research with AI so that someone then summarizes it with AI to then understand it. And I think that would be a bit of a failure. So we have to make sure that we do research with AI, but we can explain it in a pretty straightforward and easy way to understand.
I also think that trust is built with the usage, let's say, like our recent experience with these big, large language models, ChatGPT, let's say. We might not even know how it works, but if it's giving us useful results, we kind of learn. We trust over time, but we also learn when not to trust, when to correct, when it's giving wrong answers. So, but in any case, I feel that wave of large language models have helped democratizing access to new ways of getting information, analysis that was not possible before. So in the same sense, I think pushing these frontiers for AI, for example, in a way that I presented of using participatory planning, helping people to explore different scenarios and discuss, that will for sure democratize planning processes. So I could imagine at some point we can go to our municipality website and use some sort of ChatGPT, and ask about different scenarios, ask about different plans, how this might change my city, what do I feel about it, and interact with the planning process, let's say. I'm sure, at least in my view, that's good. That's a democratic way of planning.
It might even improve, as you said, there is kind of a risk that someone uses AI then to summarize outputs that are done by AI. But on the other hand, from practical experience, talking to relatives, to friends, planning processes in urban development are a secret to them, of course, because they ask how to understand it, and this might even be a way to involve them better in the conversation, not from the research side, but from this perspective. Sure. As you mentioned, kind of the models that we do not fully understand sometimes, for practical, ethical, or whatever reasons, in your research you work only with really closed models, local models that you have fully under control, basically? Or is it also the case that sometimes open models, even if we do not fully understand them, provide added value and we still apply them as long as we have proper validation procedures afterwards? It's an open question to you.
In my case, I think we mainly use closed models, like what you said. So we need to first trust what we call the system model, and based on that, we can enhance their capabilities with AI. But yeah, I could imagine that there might be other cases, mainly when you're not working for a specific city, let's say, or a specific municipality, when you're doing generalizable stuff. There's no really unique model, so it might be a little bit more of a black box. But as you mentioned, there's definitely ways to validate, to calibrate, to understand, to follow the procedure and the rules, which is something that is technical. So there's the need for a technical expertise on that explainability, let's say.
Yeah, I think as I was explaining, my case is the opposite, where I've used openly available models, but then the part of verification and making sure that we know where this information is coming from exactly is the relevant part, so that we can make sure that it's accurately representing realities. So yeah, I think it depends on the kind of use we are making of, and which is our raw material and our expected outcome, and both closed and open models could respond to that depending on the situation.
Yeah, the same. I totally agree with my colleagues. Also, in my proposal, the idea is more like a closed setting, because it can help the decision maker to redefine the territories of cross-border planning. But sure, we need to open the discussion where we are discussing about the community that live also in the area of cross-border and more complicated, as you know, because there is a border that divide two kind of national and two kind of culturally. So in this sense, AI could help us in this process.
Yeah. Yeah, I think especially in those cases where we also work together, it's interesting to see how it can overcome all of those barriers that we face when working with more traditional approaches, traditional statistical data and so on. But it would also be very interesting to see the perception of people living in, for example, a functional border area that we define as functional border area, if it is perceived in a similar manner. We are coming close to the end of our session, and we put a look back to the questions to the audience. And here we can see that about 2/3 really agree with, I guess, the common understanding around the table that it is introducing a paradigm shift or working towards a paradigm shift, opening up possibilities that would have not been possible before. But on the other hand, we also see that about 15% think that AI tools in practice will have little lasting impact on research and planning. And that would be, I think, a very interesting discussion to have as well. But we do need to continue with our plan and continue towards the closing of the session, as I mentioned. So as we come to the end of this session on AI for territorial futures, I would really like to thank the speakers, not just for sharing the methods and the insights, but also for these very critical reflections of your own work, of the opportunities and responsibilities that come with applying AI in territorial research and policymaking. So what we have seen today is AI is not a neutral tool. It shapes what we see, how we prioritize, and in practice also to an extent who gets to be part of the planning conversation. And whether we're planning infrastructure, we're planning mapping border dynamics, we're looking at housing markets or all the other application possibilities, the power of AI really lies in how we choose to use it. And this ultimately should be to support better decision making and to strengthen our capacity to respond to really complex territorial challenges that we might struggle to understand otherwise. As these technologies evolve, our jobs as researchers and policymakers is not only to innovate, but also to ensure that this innovation is used in a transparent manner, that it is inclusive, and that it is grounded in the territorial realities. So thank you very much again to the speakers. Thank you very much to the audience. And we invite you to stay with us for the next session on rethinking functional territories and spatial frameworks that will start in about 15 minutes.